Hello, I'm Caroline, and for years, my family had a ritual of exclusion. We're full, they'd say every holiday, leaving me on the outside. But the truth wasn't just that I was left out. It was the slow, quiet deception, the calculated distance, the gaslighting, the betrayal. They'd always taken, but never given. And when they needed something, when they came to me, I had one simple reply: no room. Because I had built a life, a $15 million estate, on my own. They didn't know it yet, but their game was over. And now, it was time for them to pay. I stared at the text for a long time, my fingers hovering over the screen. It was the same message my mother had sent me every Christmas for the last 10 years. I could feel the tightness in my chest before I even read it. Sorry, sweetie. We're full again this year. You understand, right? It wasn't even a question. Just a statement of fact. I'd gotten used to it. Year after year, the same words, the same ritual. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, like it was something I should be used to. The way she'd say it as though she was offering me some kind of understanding, a little kindness to soften the blow. But there was nothing soft about it. It was always, we're full, never, we'd love to have you, or, there's always room. Full meant no space for me. No space for us. Just for her, and for Isolde and her family, of course. That's how it always worked. I glanced at the Instagram stories popping up from my sister's party. They were always there, each post a reminder of how much room they had for everyone else. Chairs filled with laughing faces. Even one for the family dog, of course. I couldn't help but watch, because I wanted to feel included, wanted to pretend I wasn't left out. But I knew better. There was no room for me. Rowan, my 13-year-old, was busy stringing up lights on our tiny artificial tree. I watched him work, the concentration on his face. He loved this part of Christmas, decorating, making everything feel like it mattered. I wondered if he still believed in the magic of it all. He turned to me, a smile on his face, and asked the question I'd been dreading. Are we going to Grandpa's house this year? He asked, hopeful, like maybe this year would be different. I smiled back, my throat tight. Maybe next year, kiddo. The words didn't feel real, and I knew he could sense it. He didn't push though, just nodded and went back to his work. But I could see the glimmer of disappointment in his eyes. I had told him it would be okay, but I didn't believe it. I hadn't believed it in years. It wasn't just that they didn't want me. It was that they had never made space for me. The way it always worked, Isolde got the big seat at the table, and I was left with whatever scraps they had left to offer. Always. I was never the favorite, never the one they cherished. I was the one who just got by, the one who didn't fit. And this year, it was more apparent than ever. A few days later, I received the invitation for the family New Year's brunch. It was addressed to Rowan and family. That's what it said. Just Rowan and family. There was no mention of me. The RSVP card was the worst part. It listed the options for the kids' menu, but nothing for me. Nothing for the adult who had been a part of this family since the very beginning. My stomach sank as I stared at the invitation, the fancy lettering only making it sting more. They'd remembered Rowan, but they hadn't remembered me. I wasn't even a part of the family anymore, just a delivery system. I was there to carry my son and show up when they needed me. But I wasn't wanted. Not in any real way. I put the invitation down on the counter, my hands shaking as I tried to swallow the frustration that rose in my chest. It wasn't about the invitation, not really. It was about everything. About the years of being overlooked, of constantly being told there was no room. No space for me. And now, even Rowan had a seat at the table, but I didn't. I didn't reply to the invitation. I didn't call. I just deleted the text when my mother asked me if we were coming over. I didn't even tell her I wasn't coming. I just let it sit there, unanswered. That night, after dinner, I sat by the window with a glass of wine. The city outside looked still, just a collection of tiny lights twinkling in the distance. I watched the lights, but I wasn't seeing them. I was seeing years of rejection and silence. Seeing myself, a shadow in the background of my family's life. Maybe it's time they knew what no room really feels like, I whispered to myself, the words quiet but sharp, cutting through the weight of everything I had been holding back. I could hear the echo of my father's voice in my head, telling me when I was younger that there was always room for me, always space in their lives. But that was a lie. There had never been room, not in the way I needed it. No seat at the table, no place in their world. I poured myself another glass of wine, letting the warmth of it settle in my chest. I wasn't angry, not anymore. The anger had faded into something else. A kind of resolve. I had learned to let go of the expectation that they would change. I had learned to stop hoping for something that would never come. And that's when I made my decision. The next morning, I started planning. Not for another holiday meal with my family, not for another, maybe next year, that would never happen. I started planning for something else, something that didn't require their approval. I started planning for my own future, the one that didn't include constantly being reminded that there was no room for me. I opened the computer, started researching properties. I had saved every penny I'd ever made. I had put aside the money they never saw, the hours they never counted. And now, I would build something of my own. Something that didn't depend on them. I wouldn't need their invitation. I wouldn't need their approval. I would create a place where I belonged, where I mattered. It was time for them to see what no room really meant. But that promise Dad made to me when I turned 30, that was the beginning of everything. I never thought it would end the way it did, with me standing in front of a family photo, looking at the house that should have been mine, and realizing that not even my memories had a place there. I remember the day it happened, my 30th birthday. It wasn't a big celebration, not the kind of milestone I thought it would be. There was no party, no balloons, just a quiet family dinner. But that conversation with Dad, that conversation stuck with me, like the last whisper of a future I was supposed to have. It was late evening, the sky just starting to darken, the orange tree in the backyard casting long shadows over the garden. Dad had pulled me aside, away from the party, his expression unusually serious. His hand, usually so steady, trembled just slightly as he touched my shoulder, guiding me toward the porch. "You know, kiddo," he started, his voice low but thick with meaning, "one day this house will be yours." My breath caught. I wasn't expecting that. My gaze flickered to the house behind him, the sprawling colonial with the ivy creeping up the stone, the one I had grown up in. I had always imagined it would be part of my life, my inheritance, my place in the family. "You're the one who sacrifices," he continued, his voice steadying, "you've earned it." I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. I just nodded, feeling the weight of his words settling in my chest. It felt like validation, the kind I had been waiting for my whole life. Maybe, finally, there was something solid in my relationship with him. Something more than the disappointment I had always felt. For the next few years, I carried that moment with me, using it like armor against the subtle slights and invisible boundaries my family placed around me. The house would be mine. That was the promise. And I believed it. But somewhere along the way, the promise disappeared. 15 years later, I found myself sitting at my desk in the present day, staring at mortgage documents for my new project, the first real property I had ever purchased on my own. My heart pounded in my chest as I calculated the last bits of financial paperwork. I had to list any family assets I might inherit, so I called Dad, needing to confirm the status of the family home. I could hear the nonchalance in his voice as he spoke, almost like he wasn't fully aware of the impact his words were about to have. "Oh, I gave the house to a sold last year," he said, as if he were telling me about a routine update, like the weather or something equally trivial. The words hung in the air, a punch to the gut. The promise I had lived with for years, the one that had been my anchor, vanished in a single sentence, as casual as could be. "I gave it to a sold last year." The room seemed to close in on me, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I was supposed to be the one to inherit it. I had sacrificed my dreams, my plans, and now this. Isolde, the perfect daughter, had already taken it all. There was nothing left for me but an empty promise. I wanted to shout, to ask him why. To demand an explanation. But instead, I just thanked him, the words hollow in my throat. I hung up the phone without another word. I sat there for a while, the phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. The promise was gone. And I was left with the remnants of a life I had spent so much time trying to fit into, a life that no longer had a place for me. The bitterness was a slow burn that didn't hit all at once but rather crept up, each new realization adding another layer of pain. I couldn't stop thinking about it as I made my way to the family brunch a few days later, my mind still reeling from the conversation with Dad. Isolde was the first to greet me when I walked in, her smile as wide as ever, that gleam in her eye that told me everything was just as it should be for her. She was at the center of everything, always the star. As usual. The brunch was a grand affair, just as I had expected. The long table was filled with family members, all laughing and chatting in that warm, familiar way that made it clear I didn't belong. I caught sight of the framed photo of the house sitting on the mantel. Underneath it was a new addition, a gold plate that read "My Roots. My Legacy." My stomach churned. Isolde, standing proudly beside the photo, beamed. "The family home is now mine. Finally, where it belongs." Her voice was loud and triumphant, a statement of ownership that filled the room. Everyone clapped, and I clinked my glass with the others, smiling through clenched teeth. It wasn't about the house, not really. It was about the years I had been made to feel invisible. The years I had been the one to do everything for everyone else, never asking for anything in return, only to be forgotten the moment it really mattered. I was a footnote in my own family story. But the gut punch didn't come from Isolde's announcement. It came later, in a private conversation with Dad. He looked at me with that same tired look he always had when he didn't want to deal with things. "You're doing so well," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "You don't need it. Your sister, she needs to feel secure." My heart stopped. The words hit harder than I ever expected. So success is a disqualification for love now? I wanted to say, but I didn't. I just stood there, silent, nodding as he tried to explain. I understood, of course. Isolde had always been the one who needed extra attention, the one who couldn't be left out. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing him justify it that way, it made something inside me snap. There was no room for me, not in their world, not in their plans. I had made a mistake by thinking it would ever be different. And that, right there, was the moment I knew I was never going to be a part of their world the way I had hoped. The promise, the one I had clung to, had disappeared into thin air, like smoke. But the day I truly became invisible wasn't when they gave my house away, it was when they almost forgot I existed. But the day I truly became invisible wasn't when they gave my house away, it was when they almost forgot I existed. The phone call came in the middle of the afternoon, a quiet Wednesday. I was knee-deep in paperwork at the office, working on a deal that I had been chasing for months. The call was from Claire, a mutual friend who I hadn't spoken to in a while. At first, I assumed it was just a friendly check-in, something we used to do before life had gotten too busy. "Caroline?" Her voice was cautious, like she wasn't sure how to say what was on her mind. "I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but I thought you'd want to know. Your mom's in ICU." It took a few seconds for the words to register. My hands went still on the desk, papers scattered around me like an unfinished puzzle. "What? When? How? Is she?" I cut myself off, my throat tightening. "How did you find out?" Claire hesitated before answering. "I heard it from Diane. I didn't think you knew. I thought maybe someone would have told you by now." The truth was, I didn't know. I hadn't heard a word. There was no call, no message. Nothing. Just the cold void between me and my family, a silence that had stretched too long. "I'm sorry, Caroline." "I really am," Claire said, her voice sounding smaller now, like she regretted even telling me. I hung up without saying much more, the weight of her words still hanging in the air. My breath felt shallow, like I couldn't catch it, no matter how hard I tried. I left the office and rushed to the hospital, my heart pounding as the familiar city streets blurred past me. It wasn't a long drive, but every minute felt like an eternity. When I finally arrived at the hospital, I rushed through the front doors, only to be stopped by a nurse who looked at me with an odd expression. "Are you here to visit a friend of the family?" she asked, not even glancing up from her clipboard. The question hit me like a slap. A friend of the family? Wasn't I supposed to be family? But I kept the thought to myself, biting back the sting that burned my throat. "I'm her daughter," I said, my voice a little shakier than I meant for it to be. The nurse blinked, then gave me a polite but distant nod, like it didn't quite register. "Oh, right. I'll check you in." I followed her to the elevator in silence, my mind racing with everything that had led me to this moment. When I finally arrived at the ICU, I was still not listed as the next of kin. A note sat in my mom's chart, reminding the nurses that my sister, Isolde, was the primary contact. There was no mention of me. No space for me. Not in the hospital room. Not in her life. The shock of it was almost overwhelming. I had always been there. Every holiday, every birthday, I had been there. And yet, in this moment, I was nothing. I was invisible. My mother lay in that sterile hospital room, and I was left standing at the door, unable to even be the one to make decisions for her. I couldn't even find the strength to be angry. I just felt numb. The years of pretending, of forcing myself to fit into a mold that wasn't mine, suddenly felt like a complete waste. All of it. The years of sacrifice, of working hard to prove myself, to earn my place in the family. And for what? So Isolde could be the one to inherit everything? So she could take the house and my parents' love without a second thought? I stepped out of the ICU, needing some space to breathe. The hallways were quiet, empty except for the occasional nurse or doctor. I found an empty bench near the waiting area and sat down, feeling the coolness of the metal seat seep into my bones. My phone buzzed. A text from Rowan. "Are you at Grandma's yet? I miss you." I almost laughed, bitter and dry. It was like he didn't even understand. Like, after everything, he still didn't get it. Still held on to that little bit of hope that they would love him the way I had once wished for. I replied with a simple, "Not yet, kiddo." It felt like the longest silence I'd ever endured. I sat there for what felt like hours, the weight of the world pressing down on my chest. I wasn't a part of their world anymore. Not in the way I had once hoped for. I was an outsider, a placeholder for someone else to take my place. Isolde was always the one who mattered more. Always the one they had chosen to be the star of their family. And I was nothing. By the time I got home that evening, the dark sky outside my apartment seemed to match the emptiness I felt inside. I didn't want to go out again, didn't want to deal with any more lies. But I had to. I had to face the truth. And the truth was, they didn't need me. They never had. I found a Christmas card waiting for me when I opened my mailbox. I knew who it was from before I even touched it. The same fancy envelope, with my parents' names written in cursive on the front. I could already feel the familiar sting of being excluded. I opened it slowly, almost afraid to look. The card itself was thick, shiny, adorned with the typical holiday decorations. But when I flipped it over to see the message inside, my stomach dropped. It wasn't for me. It was addressed to Rowan and family. My name wasn't there. My son's name was there, but not mine. Inside, there were printed messages for everyone else, my sister's family, her husband, the kids. Not a word for me. Not a word acknowledging my existence. I held the card under the light, hoping somehow I had missed something. Maybe they had just forgotten to include me. But no. There it was, clear as day. Rowan and family. The rest of us were nothing. Just extras in a family that never wanted me. I stared at the card, the words blurring together as my vision welled up with tears I couldn't bring myself to shed. The silence between us had never felt so loud. Maybe I never belonged. Maybe I was never really part of their story. I tossed the card on the kitchen table and poured myself a cup of coffee, the warmth doing little to ease the chill that had settled in my bones. As I stared at the card, I muttered softly to myself, "I'm not part of their story anymore." Maybe I never was. I didn't feel the sting anymore. That had faded long ago. This was just numbness. A cold, aching emptiness. But they'd remember me when it came time to collect. It wasn't about love. It never had been. It was about what I could do for them. The moment I stopped being useful, I ceased to exist. I had always been the one they turned to. The dependable one. The responsible one. The one who could always be counted on to fix their problems. I gave so much of myself, and I never asked for anything in return. But somehow, it was never enough. Not for them. I remember the time when I was the one they needed, and I stepped up. I had just sold my car, my old reliable sedan that had seen me through thick and thin. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then, Dad lost a chunk of his retirement savings. It hit them hard, harder than they expected. Mom cried about it for days, and Dad tried to brush it off, but I saw the worry in his eyes. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the shame. About needing help, even though they'd always prided themselves on being self-sufficient. I knew they needed it, so I made the sacrifice. I transferred the money from the car sale directly into their account. It wasn't a huge sum, but it was all I had at the time. I didn't think twice. Dad promised me then, through his shaky breath, "We'll pay you back as soon as we're back on our feet." I swear it. It was a promise, and like all promises, I held on to it. I trusted them. I believed in them. But when you've given so much of yourself, you start to wonder if anyone's even paying attention to who you are anymore. A year passed, and I never saw a penny of that money back. Life moved on, and somehow, I didn't even notice the growing distance between us. Until one Sunday afternoon, when Isolde drove up to the family house in her shiny new car. I was there that day, standing in the driveway with Rowan. I watched her pull in, that gleaming red sports car, looking out of place among the weathered family vehicles. I didn't ask how she could afford it, but it was clear, this was no ordinary purchase. The fact that she could drop that kind of cash, when my family was struggling to make ends meet, didn't sit right with me. But it wasn't the car that made my stomach churn, it was the realization that I had helped fund it. Later, at the family brunch, I couldn't keep my eyes off her. She was basking in the attention, as always. And then Dad, always ready to heap praise on her, raised his glass and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, Isolde's always been the responsible one. She's always thinking of others, doing what needs to be done. I'm so proud of her. It hit me then, harder than I expected. I had sacrificed my own comfort for their well-being, and here they were, praising Isolde as the one who deserved all the recognition. Not only had I been sidelined, but now, my good deeds were being forgotten. That same afternoon, I hosted Mom's surprise birthday party. A family tradition, sure, but one that I'd made sure to keep alive for years. I had quietly organized everything, even hired a caterer, because I knew Mom would appreciate the gesture. But when I arrived at the venue, ready to help set up, I was immediately ushered to the back. You're here to help with the setup, right? The MC of the event asked, as though I were just another worker in the crowd. Excuse me, do you have the wine list? It wasn't the first time I had been mistaken for staff at my own family's event, but it was the first time it had hit me this hard. That night, Isolde gave a speech, standing confidently in front of everyone, talking about how hard everyone worked to make this day special. She never once mentioned me. I tried to swallow the hurt. I smiled and clinked my glass along with the others, but inside, it was as though I was already a ghost in their world. Invisible, unimportant. My name was never said aloud, and my efforts had been erased. The humiliation gnawed at me, and when I left the party that night, I drove home in silence, the weight of everything sitting heavily on my chest. I didn't want to confront them. I didn't want to have another argument about how they used me. So, instead, I did what I always did. I kept my thoughts to myself. When I got home, I didn't even take off my coat. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a notebook I had started weeks ago. It was titled, The Exit Plan. I knew I had to let go. Let go of the hope that one day, they'd see me for who I really was. Let go of the expectation that my worth would somehow be acknowledged, even when I did everything for them. I had already given too much of myself, and for what? I flipped to the first page and wrote, they only remember me when they need help. Let's make sure they don't need me anymore. The words felt heavy, like a weight lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't anger that fueled me, but something colder, something more determined. I wasn't going to play the martyr anymore. I wasn't going to be the one they could rely on just because they knew I would say yes. It was time to put myself first. It was time to stop being useful to them. I thought back to the car, to the party, to all the moments when I had been nothing more than a tool for their convenience. It wasn't about love. It had never been about love. It was about convenience. And I had spent too many years being their convenience. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. I wasn't going to let this happen anymore. I would cut ties with them if I had to. They couldn't use me anymore. Not like that. But as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my notebook, I couldn't help but wonder, would they miss me? Or would they simply forget I was ever there? I never thought I'd hear it. Not from her. But then again, after all these years, I should have known. The truth was always hiding behind the polite words, the empty gestures, the hollow promises. It had always been there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be exposed. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in the waiting room at Rowan's school for the parent-teacher conference, my phone buzzing in my hand. My mind was preoccupied with the notes I had to review for his upcoming grades. The usual. I wasn't really paying attention to the conversations around me until I heard my mother's voice. Caroline always distances herself. We'd include her, but she's made her choices, she said, loud enough for me to hear, though she had no idea I was standing just around the corner. I froze. My heart sank into my stomach, and my breath caught in my throat. The words were casual, almost offhand, as if they were an accepted fact. As if this was the explanation for why I wasn't around, why I never showed up for the holidays anymore. As if the rejection was my fault. I wanted to walk into the room, confront her, say something, anything, but I didn't. I stayed hidden, just beyond her line of sight. The other parent, whose name I didn't catch, responded, "Oh, she must be difficult." That one sentence, spoken like a verdict, settled in the air between us. It was like a cold slap across my face. I stayed silent. I let them think what they wanted to think. It wasn't worth confronting them. After all, they had already decided my place in their world. I turned and walked out of the school. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, and the sting of her words lingered in my chest like a heavy weight. I thought I'd gotten used to it, but every time, it felt like a fresh wound. Every time, it reminded me how far I'd drifted from the family I'd spent my life trying to belong to. That night, when I got home, I sank into the couch, exhausted. I poured myself a glass of wine, trying to drown the discomfort of what I'd overheard. I thought about the years of trying to fit in, of being there when they needed me, and of how, despite all my efforts, I'd been pushed aside. But it wasn't just the words that hurt. It was the complete dismissal. They had all but erased me from their lives. And now, they were rewriting the narrative. I wasn't just distant, I was the one who had made my choices. The truth was, I hadn't made a choice, I had been cast aside, and they had made it clear I didn't matter. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone screen, not knowing what to do next. But then, an email popped up in my inbox, one that would change everything. It was from Isolde, my sister. She had forwarded the message by accident, and as soon as I saw the subject line, "Holiday Planning, Don't CC Caroline," I knew it wasn't going to be good. I opened it, my hands trembling, and read the body of the email. "If she shows up, it'll ruin the vibe. She's exhausting to deal with. Just say there's no room." The words felt like a punch to the gut. I stared at the screen, my mind racing, trying to comprehend what I was reading. They'd been planning without me all along. They'd made sure I wasn't included in the holiday plans, and now they were actively trying to keep me out. My sister had never even asked if I wanted to come. It was all just decided for me. I didn't react immediately. I didn't call them, didn't scream, didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the email. My mind was numb, and my thoughts were cold. I printed the email out and pinned it to the fridge. I wanted it to stare me in the face every day, until I had the clarity to move forward. Until I figured out what to do next. Later that evening, after Rowan had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water in my hand. I looked at the email again, and a feeling of emptiness washed over me. They didn't even care enough to hide it. They didn't think I would ever find out. But I did. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just a member of the family who had been excluded. I had been erased. I had been removed from the equation. It wasn't just the holidays. It was everything. They didn't need me, and they didn't want me. I was invisible to them. That night, I sat down at my desk and began to sketch. I pulled out a blueprint I had been working on for a while, my new home. A place of my own, away from all of them. A place where I could build something for myself. Where I wouldn't have to be the one who was always giving and never getting anything back. I wrote across the top of the page, "They taught me silence. I'll show them what silence builds." It was the beginning of something new. A new chapter. A new life. I didn't know them anything anymore. Not a single thing. They had erased me from their holiday list, so I wrote my own guest list instead. I never expected to be erased. Not in the way it happened. It wasn't just a moment, no, it was a slow and steady disappearance, woven through every photograph, every word left unsaid, every gesture that wasn't made. I had become an afterthought, a footnote in a story that should have been mine. It wasn't until the open house that the full weight of it hit me. The house had always been their sanctuary, but it had become something else over the years. A shrine to the family they wanted to be, not the one we actually were. I walked through the front door, Rowan by my side, and felt the hollowness of it all. The familiar smell of pine and cinnamon in the air, the clinking of glasses from the kitchen, the sound of children's laughter echoing from the living room, yet, it felt like I was in someone else's home. The walls, once filled with family photos of birthdays, holidays, and milestones, now seemed empty. There were no pictures of me. Not a single one. I walked past the gallery wall, scanning each framed image, my sister's smiling face, my parents standing proud with their grandchildren, even pictures of family pets. But when I came to the spot where I should have been, there was nothing. It was as though I had never existed. I stopped in front of a photo of the three of us, me, Isolde, and our parents, taken when we were children. It had always been one of my favorites. The colors were faded, the edges worn, but it was a moment in time when we were a family, when things felt whole. But not anymore. The picture on the wall had been edited. It was cropped, and Isolde was the only one left in the frame. I stood there, my fingers brushing against the smooth edge of the frame, the hollow ache in my chest growing. They had taken me out. Cut me from the picture. Erased me as if I never mattered. I couldn't breathe. The suffocating emptiness that had been building inside me suddenly consumed every inch of my being. I wanted to scream, to tear down the walls and show them what they had done. But I didn't. Instead, I just kept walking. Rowan tugged at my sleeve, looking up at me with a bright, innocent smile, unaware of the storm raging inside me. "Mom, look at this one," he said, pointing to a picture of himself with his cousins. His joy was contagious, and for a moment, I forced a smile, pretending like everything was okay. But it wasn't okay. Not anymore. We wandered through the house for a while, Rowan talking animatedly about the new toys he'd gotten, the games he'd played with the other kids. I nodded and smiled, listening as best I could, but the walls of the house seemed to close in around me. Every corner I turned felt like a reminder of how little I mattered. Finally, we made our way to the foyer, where a large poster for the family foundation hung. It was framed and displayed proudly, right above the front door. As I looked at it, my breath caught in my throat. The photo on the poster was one from our childhood, an image of the three of us, smiling and happy. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized something wasn't right. It was cropped, just like the picture in the living room. Isolde's face was the only one clearly visible. My shoulder, barely recognizable, was still there. But I was gone. Completely. No one else seemed to notice. No one seemed to care. Isolde, standing nearby with her family, smiled and chatted with the guests, completely oblivious to the pain searing through my chest. I stood frozen in front of that poster, my mind spinning. How had it come to this? How had I let them make me invisible, even in the photos, in the memories? I couldn't understand it. All those years of sacrifice, all the love I'd given, all the moments I'd shared with them. And now, I was nothing more than a ghost. I turned away, walking toward the door. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't thank anyone for the hospitality. I just left. Rowan didn't understand why I was leaving. He wanted to stay longer, to play with his cousins, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. I couldn't bring myself to explain. Not yet. Maybe not ever. When we got home, I didn't speak much. I sat down on the couch, staring at the empty space where I used to feel like I belonged. Rowan asked if he could watch his new favorite show, and I nodded absently. The house, my house now, was quiet, but it felt louder than ever. I couldn't shake the image of that family portrait. The one where I was no longer visible. It gnawed at me, the thought that I could be erased so easily, like I had never mattered in the first place. Later that evening, I took out the original version of that photo, the one they hadn't touched. The one where we were all together, smiling, before everything fell apart. I placed it on my kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. I couldn't bring myself to frame it. I couldn't hang it in my new home, because it wasn't real anymore. It didn't belong to me, not in the way it once had. But I needed to do something. I needed to take back control of the story they were writing about me. I picked up a marker and wrote a single sentence beneath the photo: "I don't need to be in their frame to exist." It felt final. It felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I wasn't going to fight to be in their pictures anymore. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at their table. I was going to build my own place, one where I could belong, not because of them, but because of me. The next morning, I didn't make any phone calls. I didn't text anyone. I didn't try to make sense of what had happened. I simply went to my desk and started working. I wasn't going to waste another minute on them. They thought they could erase me from their story, but I was already writing my own. I stood in the middle of my $15 million marble estate, listening to the silence. It was almost suffocating, but not in a bad way. More like the kind of silence you feel after a storm has passed, when the world feels still but something has shifted. Everything around me was sleek, polished, and brand new, unblemished, just like the future I was carving out for myself. This was mine. No one else's. I walked slowly through the spacious halls, the marble floors cool under my feet, the high ceilings making everything feel larger than life. Each step echoed in the emptiness, a reminder that I had built this alone. My hands, my decisions, my sacrifice had made this house into a home. Or rather, the home I had always longed for. The kind that didn't require permission to exist, the kind that didn't come with strings attached. It wasn't just a house, it was freedom. But the freedom didn't come without its price. The house, for all its grandeur, was still a lonely space. I'd spent months furnishing it, designing it, and yet, there were still rooms that felt empty, corners that echoed with an absence that money couldn't fill. I wasn't used to being alone in a space so large, but it was my space. The only space that had ever truly been mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been waiting for an invitation, just once, for my family to make room for me at their table. They had made it so clear that there was never any room, that my presence was more an inconvenience than a blessing. But now, I had a seat at my own table. A beautiful, solid, marble table. And no one else was invited. As I made my way into the living room, I paused in front of a massive mirror. The reflection staring back at me was unfamiliar, not because it wasn't my face, but because it felt like I had become a stranger to myself. The woman in the mirror didn't resemble the one who had tried so hard to fit into their world. She didn't need to. The woman in the mirror had built a world for herself, and that was something they would never understand. Just then, the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the stillness like a sharp knife, pulling me back to reality. I walked slowly to the door, my heels clicking on the marble floor. When I opened it, the housekeeper was standing there, looking a bit confused. "Oh, are you the new guest?" she asked, eyeing me curiously. I paused for a moment, suppressing a laugh. The house that should have been mine, my inheritance, my birthright, was now a space so foreign to me that I wasn't even recognized. "No, I'm not a guest," I replied, my voice calm but laced with irony. "I live here." The housekeeper blinked a few times, as though processing what I had said. "Oh," she said, smiling awkwardly, "sorry about that." I stepped aside to let her in, but as she walked past me, I couldn't help but feel the sting of her words. This house, which I had worked so hard for, now stood as a testament to everything I had given up. Every penny I had saved, every ounce of energy I had poured into building it, just so I could feel like I finally belonged somewhere. But the joke was on me. I had built it for myself, but in doing so, I had shut out the people who should have been there. I was still a stranger in my own family's eyes. The housekeeper made her way toward the kitchen, and I turned back to the living room. I could still hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the soft whirring of the vacuum cleaner from the hallway, but none of it was enough to shake the feeling of isolation that hung in the air. I needed to get out of here. I needed to be anywhere but alone in this house. As I grabbed my coat and keys, I decided to go for a drive. It was late afternoon, the sun low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the city. The road stretched out before me, and for a moment, I felt like I could escape everything. But as I passed familiar streets, the ache in my chest grew. I wasn't running from them anymore, I was running from myself. But there was no place to hide. I pulled into a parking spot outside of the local cafe, the one I used to visit with Rowan when he was younger. The place hadn't changed at all, and for a moment, it felt like time had slowed down, like I could step back into a version of my life where everything wasn't so complicated. When I walked inside, the familiar smell of coffee and baked goods hit me, and for a moment, it felt like home. I ordered my usual, a black coffee and a croissant, and sat by the window, watching the world go by. But as I sat there, alone, I couldn't shake the image of the family event that had taken place just days before. Isolde's grand party. The one I had organized and funded. I had been erased. Again. I had been invisible at my own event. Just like every other time. The last time I had been in a room full of people who should have been my family, I had been treated like a servant. I was asked to help set up the party, as if I were just another part of the staff. No one thanked me. No one acknowledged my role in making everything happen. And then, as the evening progressed, Isolde took center stage, giving a speech that felt like a slap in the face. "None of this would have been possible without our amazing team," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. I was the team, but I was never seen as part of the family. It was a harsh truth, one I had been unwilling to face for so long. But now it was clear. They would never see me the way I deserved to be seen. I didn't respond to the speech. I didn't clap. I didn't say anything. I just left. I didn't need to hear any more lies. I didn't need to be reminded of how easily they could erase me from the picture. The drive back to the estate had been quiet. The sound of the engine was the only thing that kept me company. When I returned home, I stood in front of the mirror again, staring at my reflection. I couldn't let them win. The silence in the house had become deafening, but this time it felt like power. The kind of power I had taken back from them. And as I stood there, looking at my own reflection, I realized something. I didn't need to prove my worth to them anymore. I didn't need to be in their family photo to exist. I was already writing my own story. And this time, no one would erase me. I had no idea that answering the phone that night would feel like standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump, though I wasn't sure what would happen when I landed. The sound of the ringing phone sliced through the quiet atmosphere of my estate, echoing in the marble halls. It was the call I had been expecting. I'd prepared myself for this moment, but still, my hand lingered just a moment longer before I picked it up. The weight of the decision rested heavily in the silence that hung between me and that one simple word, hello. It was my mother's voice on the other end, sugary sweet, as it always was when she needed something. Sweetie, your sister's furnace broke down. We can't host this year. We thought maybe we could come to your place for Christmas dinner. Her words were meant to be an offer, but to me, they were just another demand, another reminder of how easily they forgot me when things were going well. The flicker of doubt stirred in me, but I held it at bay, making sure my voice stayed steady, calm. I looked around the empty dining room of my grand estate. The polished marble table in front of me gleamed under the light. This space, this house, was mine. My achievement. The one thing I had built with my own hands, without asking for anyone's help. And now, my family was coming to claim a seat at my table, like they had every year before, just when they had no other options. I wasn't sure if it was the house itself or the weight of all the years they had denied me that made my response so final, but I said it anyway. Sure. Plenty of room, I replied, the words almost tasting bitter on my tongue. There was a pause on the other end, a brief silence that felt more like a question than an answer. Really? You mean it? Actually, there's no room, I said, my voice measured but firm. The line went still, and I could almost hear her processing the words. My mother's voice cracked. What do you mean? It's just us. I stared at the skyline through the massive windows, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. This was my world now. A world where I didn't have to ask for permission to exist, where I could carve out my own space without feeling guilty for taking it. The kids are staying with me this year, I said softly, the words slipping out before I could second-guess myself. We are full. I could hear her taking a breath, a last-ditch attempt to regain control of the situation, but I'd already made my decision. I was done. This time, the silence wasn't an invitation for more guilt, it was peace. I ended the call without waiting for a response, leaving the phone on the counter, its empty buzzing a reminder of everything I had just said. The silence that followed felt different this time, more solid, less lonely. It was a victory of sorts. A small one, maybe, but it was mine. For the first time in a long while, I felt full. I walked slowly through the house, letting my fingers glide across the polished surfaces, each touch a reminder of the journey that had brought me here. There were still empty spaces, too many for my liking, but for the first time, the emptiness didn't sting. It was just a part of what I had chosen. I had built this house, but more importantly, I had built myself. My gaze shifted to the empty chairs around the dining room table. The seats that had once been filled by people who only called me when it suited them. I had made room for myself. And no one, least of all my family, could take that away from me. As I sat down at the table, I poured myself a glass of wine, the deep red liquid swirling in the crystal glass. I raised it to no one but myself. The moment felt like closure, like the final chapter of a book I had been forced to write, but in the end, I was proud of the story. The one where I took back everything they had ever denied me. I was full now, not just in my home, but in myself. But the quiet didn't last long. The phone buzzed again, interrupting the calm I had found. The familiar sound filled the room, and I already knew who it was. It didn't take long for the text messages to start pouring in. We didn't mean it like that, sweetie. Can we talk? We're sorry. We really are. They had no idea how to apologize for years of neglect, years of treating me like an afterthought. But they didn't get to rewrite history, not this time. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened my phone and sent a photo of Rowan and the kids, their smiling faces framed by the lights of the Christmas tree. The image looked perfect, like everything I had wanted for so long, a family, my family, here in my home. I attached a single line to the photo, "We're full." With that, I set my phone face down on the table, the constant buzzing from their messages going unnoticed. I poured myself another glass of wine, the warmth spreading through me like a slow burn. Finally, I whispered to myself, "So am I." The weight of it all, the years of waiting, the years of being denied, fell away like a heavy cloak, leaving me lighter than I had ever been before. As I sat there, alone, but no longer lonely, I knew the truth. They would never come back. And I didn't need them to. The flicker of the city lights reflected off the polished marble floors, a stark reminder of the life I had built. The house was quiet tonight, too quiet, perhaps, but it wasn't the loneliness I once feared. It was a peaceful kind of solitude, one that I had earned. For years, I had waited for an invitation to their table, hoping for something, anything to show that I mattered to them. Tonight, as I sat by the fire, sipping my wine, the city skyline stretching out before me, I realized, this was the first year I didn't wait. I didn't need their invitation. I made my own. Outside, the sound of fireworks echoed in the distance, a celebration in the air, yet inside, there was no noise, no clamor for attention. I was the only one who mattered in this moment, and I didn't need anyone else to validate it. This is the first year I didn't wait for an invitation, I whispered to myself. This year, I made my own. The fire crackled softly, its warmth spreading through the room, mingling with the flickering lights from the city below. There was no more need to pretend I belonged where I had been discarded. The house I built was a sanctuary. It wasn't just an investment in bricks and marble. It was a statement. I took another sip of wine, the smoothness of it slipping down my throat, and I allowed myself a moment to reflect. For years, I had played the game. The daughter who always came back when they called, who took on every responsibility without complaint, who gave and gave until there was nothing left for me. I had sacrificed my time, my energy, and my self-respect. And for what? A seat at their table? The illusion of love? Now, I had a home that was mine, a family I had chosen, Rowan, the kids, and a few close friends who had never treated me as an afterthought. I wasn't alone. I had built something real, something that belonged to me. The sound of my phone breaking the silence interrupted my thoughts. It lit up on the table in front of me, a message from my mother. I already knew what it was before I even picked it up. I could almost hear her voice in my head, the sweetness that always hid the manipulations beneath. "We miss you, and we're sorry. Can we start over? Please." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my finger hovering over the keypad. I had heard this apology before. I had been here 1,000 times, waiting for something that would never come. I put the phone down, the message sitting unread for a few more seconds, its weight pressing down on me. They were sorry. But they were sorry for their own convenience, not because they truly cared about me. They were sorry because I had pulled away. Because, for once, I had set boundaries. The anger didn't come this time. It wasn't the hot, burning rage I used to feel, the kind that would tear through me and leave me gasping for breath. No, this time it was something else. Something quieter, something more peaceful. I replied, after what felt like an eternity. "I'm sorry. I'm not the person you remember. I can't go back." The words came out easily, but the weight of them settled in my chest, heavy but necessary. This wasn't a moment for forgiveness, it was a moment for finality. They had pushed me away for so long. Now, I had to keep my distance to protect what was left of myself. I put the phone face down, turned it to the side, and watched as the screen faded to black. The stillness that followed was deafening in its calmness. I was no longer the person they could manipulate. I had learned from the best. And for the first time, I understood that it wasn't my job to fix them. The sound of the doorbell ringing broke the silence, followed by a knock. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure of who could possibly be at my door at this hour. It wasn't them, I knew that. I wasn't expecting any more visitors. Not after everything that had happened. I walked to the door, the heavy silence of the house making the distance feel longer than it really was. When I opened it, I wasn't surprised to see Rowan standing there, holding a small plate of cookies. His smile lit up the night in a way the city skyline never could. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, his voice warm with excitement. "I figured you could use these." I smiled, a full smile, the kind that reached my eyes. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," I said, taking the plate from his hands. He stepped inside, and I shut the door behind him, the finality of that simple gesture sinking in. I didn't need to wait for an invitation anymore. I had my family here, the one I had chosen. And I knew that this simple moment of love and acceptance, was all I needed. We sat down at the kitchen table, Rowan and I, sharing the cookies and talking about his day. For the first time in a long while, there were no more doubts, no more regrets. I had made my peace with my decisions, and now I could enjoy the life I had built. As we ate, I looked out the window, watching the fireworks explode in the distance. For years, I had waited for a chance to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. But tonight, I realized something. I had finally stopped waiting. And in doing so, I had found everything I had ever wanted. There was no more room for regret. No more room for the people who had pushed me aside. It was just me, Rowan, and the life we had built together. As we come to the end of this journey, one thing becomes clear: sometimes, the hardest battles we face are not against the world, but against the people we trust the most. Caroline's story teaches us the power of self-reliance, the importance of standing up for ourselves, and the ultimate freedom that comes from no longer seeking approval from those who never truly cared. Have you ever been in a situation where your own family turned their back on you? How did you cope with it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to subscribe for more thought-provoking tales and lessons.